Hey, what's up everyone, Johnny the Geek here, and this is the Windows installation guide for the AMD FM2 Plus build that I just did. And this is particular to the ASRock motherboard. However, you could use this guide for many other systems out there, not just for the FM2 Plus system, right? And so the first thing you're going to have to do is get yourself a USB installation drive, and I have another video showing you how to do just that. Links to that, of course, will be in the description. And so once you get your USB drive, well, with Windows installation on it, you're going to plug it into the USB 2.0 port, right? And for Windows 7 installation, I recommend that you use the USB 2.0 port for best compatibility, and I'll explain why that's best in another video for troubleshooting Windows 7 installation. When you start up the system, you'll see the motherboard logo, and for ASRock, you need to press the delete key or the F2 key repeatedly until you get into the UEFI screen. Once you get into the UEFI screen, the first thing you'll need to configure is the time. It's important that the time is correct in order to receive updates from Windows later on. Next, you'll take a look at the basic specifications of the hardware, like the CPU and the CPU speed, the RAM and the RAM speed. And before we make changes, let's load the default settings. Since we know that the RAM speed is not 1600 MHz and specifically 2133, we can go ahead and make this change now. Most of the settings can be left alone because you want to use the most basic and stable settings. Once you have all of the software installed, you can play around with tweaking the system if you want. Over in the boot option, the one important option you want to change is the SATA mode in the storage option under the advanced menu to AHCI. Next, you will change the boot option, and this is a little tricky. If you notice that the first boot option is the 1TB hard drive, but that's not what we want. We want to have the SSD to be the first boot device because that's what we're installing the OS onto. If you notice though, the SSD isn't even an option. So we have to change the hard drive priorities to the SSD to be the first listed as the first boot option. Now you will see that the system will boot the SSD first before everything. You might wonder, why didn't I change the first boot option to the USB drive instead? And I'll explain that in the troubleshooting video. Now you can exit and save the changes to boot the system. Press F11 during the ASRock screen logo to show the boot menu. We're going to manually choose a USB flash drive, and yours will most likely not be called Corsair Voyager GT 3.0. It will obviously be called whatever model USB drive you used. Once you select it, the Windows pre-installation environment will now start up. This is loading some basic drivers inside the USB drive that's just enough to get the OS installed on your system. Select your language and click on Install Now. Accept the terms and choose a custom advanced type of installation. Next, you should be seeing the hard drives you have plugged into your system. If you don't, then there are a couple of reasons why and a few extra steps to get it fixed. Again, that's going to be in the troubleshooting video. We can easily distinguish between the SSD and the hard drive based on the sizes we see here. Disk 0 is what we want to install the OS on. Select that and click on Drive Options. Then click on New and use up all the space available to the drive. Click on Apply and then click on OK. You will see that it created a small partition called System Reserve, and you'll leave that alone. It is important for booting up your system. Select a partition to primary and click on Next. Don't worry about the other empty drive. We're going to be formatting that and set that up inside of Windows. Windows installation is now going to unpack the files onto the hard drive and reboot twice. At this point, you don't even need the USB drive anymore. On the setup screen, you're going to create a user and computer name. Choose anything you like. You don't have to make it the same as mine. You can also choose to have a password or not. I chose not to. Now I get to the part where everyone asks, is Windows free? It is obviously not free, but you can install it without a serial key and activate it later once you have purchased your key. So click on Next and select an option on installing updates. I chose only to install important updates because I don't want Windows to install drivers for me because they might be outdated or the wrong one. Next, you will set the correct time and the time zone. Once the system boots to the desktop, you'll notice that the resolution is really low. Check out the device manager to see what isn't working. Insert the driver's disk that came with the motherboard. If it does not automatically play the disk, then you can start the autoplay from going to My Computer, then right-clicking on the disk, select Open, and double-click the Setup application. Click the Drivers tab and proceed to install only the LAN drivers. Click on Next and then click on Install. Now that the Ethernet port works and you've selected the type of network, you will need to restart the computer. Now's a good time to change the resolution of the screen to make it easier to view everything. Right-click on the desktop, choose Screen Resolution, and change it to the highest possible resolution. My screen is a 1920 by 1080, and that's what I've selected here, so I clicked on Keep Changes and OK. Now we can go to the motherboard's manufacturer's website to download and install the rest of the drivers. I did a Google search for ASRock and went straight to the download page. Then I selected the model of my motherboard and the version of Windows that I have. That brings me to a list of all the drivers available for my board. I'm going to download all of the drivers except for the floppy and the RAID drivers. While the drivers are downloading, I went over to the AMD website to download drivers for my GPU. I picked the desktop R7-200 series along with the version of Windows that I'm using. Now that everything is finished downloading, I'm unpacking each of the zipped files I downloaded by simply double-clicking the zip file and dragging the contents to the desktop. It is important that I install the chipset related drivers for AMD, and this board, it's called the All-in-One folder. Follow the on-screen prompts during the installation. You might get more prompts to run. The system will require a couple of reboots because it is now installing the hardware with the proper drivers. Now you can pretty much go and install the rest of the drivers. There's not really much to it. All you do is double click the setup files and follow the on-screen prompts, followed by a series of reboots. Then the last thing we're going to install is the graphics card drivers. You can either do the Express or the custom to see what exactly you want to install. I chose to include the Raptor software, but after the installation and reboot, I chose not to have it start up automatically on boot. If you look at the device manager again, you will notice that there are no errors or alerts for drivers. Almost everything after this point is up to you as to what you want to do. I will show you what I do to my system personally, but these are just my own personal preferences. The first thing I like to do is change to the Aero Glass theme and then add some icons to my desktop. I add all the options that are listed here. Next, I like to change the power options to high performance so that the system runs at its best all the time. I also change when the display turns off and when the computer sleeps. I usually change it to turn off after an hour, but for now I'll leave it on to never so that I can monitor the updates and I'm about to go through. Next, I will change the UAC because I know what it is that I'm installing and I don't need the extra warnings. Now I'm going to run all the updates, and this is going to take a very long time. I also install every update and every optional update. It will ask you to reboot a few times, but don't think that it finishes only in one round. You have to check for updates quite a few times actually. After hours of updating, we can now start to install some software. The first thing I will install is Flash Player for Internet Explorer. Then after that, I will go to a very useful website called ninite.com. On this site, I will choose my favorite free apps like an antivirus, web browser, video codecs, and utilities. This site creates a small installer file that will download and install each one of these programs one by one. It will know what version to install for your OS, but best of all, it will remove the bloatware that a lot of these programs come with. After it installs everything, be sure to run each one of the programs to make sure it installed correctly, and also accept any license or agreements they might have. For my video player, I like to use Windows Media Player to play all my media files. So during the setup, I will select the option to let me choose the file types that the media player will open. I selected to play all media file types. Update the antivirus program and install Flash Player for Firefox if you had Firefox installed. It's pretty much exactly the same as installing it on Internet Explorer. So remember that other hard drive you have installed? Now we're going to set it up by typing in Computer Management in the Start menu. Select Disk Management in the left panel and wait for the drives to scan. You might be asked to initialize the disk. If the disk is larger than 2 terabytes or will be a primary boot drive, you can choose a GOID partition table, or GPT. Since the drive will be neither of that, I chose the master boot record. Now that it's initialized, I will now format it by right-clicking and choosing a new simple volume option. I'm using all of the volume size available and naming it 1 terabyte with the quick format option selected. This process should be quick, and now your drive is ready to go. So that concludes this video on installing Windows 7. Be sure to subscribe to see the video on troubleshooting Windows 7 installation coming out later on, as well as more build guides in the future. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.